What happens when a little black girl, silenced by trauma, finds her voice and uses it to move the entire world? This is the story of Maya Angelou, a woman who turned pain into poetry, silence into power, and struggle into strength. From a childhood filled with heartbreak to standing on the world stage as one of the greatest poets and activists of all time, Maya's journey is nothing short of extraordinary. But it wasn't fame or fortune that made her unforgettable. It was her unshakable courage to tell the truth of her people, her pain, and her hope. Stay with me, because Maya Angelou's story will remind you that even the quietest voices can echo through history forever. The story of Maya Angelou doesn't begin with fame, with poetry, or with applause echoing through grand halls. No, her journey begins in silence. Born in 1928, in the racially divided town of St. Louis, Missouri, Maya was brought into a world that was already stacked against her. Her real name was Marguerite Annie Johnson, but the world would one day call her Maya Angelou. Yet, in the early years of her life, she was just a little black girl trying to survive in a world that rarely showed kindness to children like her. Her parents' marriage crumbled when she was just a toddler, and young Maya, along with her brother Bailey, was sent alone, on a train, across hundreds of miles to live with her grandmother in the tiny segregated town of Stamps, Arkansas. Imagine the fear. Two small children, barely able to understand the world, clutching each other's hands, abandoned on a train with tags pinned to their clothes. This was their reality. In Stamps, life was harsh. Segregation wasn't just an idea. It was an everyday law that dictated where Maya could sit, where she could walk, and even how she could look at white people. Black children like Maya grew up in a world where hope was often crushed before it could bloom. But there was something in Maya's spirit, something fierce. Even as a child, she absorbed the rhythm of church songs, the whispers of her grandmother's prayers, and the pain of injustice that hung heavy in the air. She was quiet, observant, almost as if she were storing every detail deep inside, waiting for the day when she would let it all out. Yet, tragedy would strike her life far too early. When Maya was just 8 years old, she experienced a trauma that left her shattered. She was assaulted by her mother's boyfriend. When Maya, in her innocence, confided what had happened, her family reported the man to authorities. Days later, he was killed, likely by members of Maya's own family. Little Maya, crushed by guilt, believed her words had killed him. And so she made a vow she would never speak again. For almost 5 years, Maya Angelou did not utter a single word to anyone. She became a silent child, moving like a shadow through life, retreating into herself. But while her mouth was silent, her mind was roaring. She devoured books, poetry, and plays. She read Shakespeare, Edgar Allan Poe, and black writers like Paul Laurence Dunbar. Words became her secret companions, her escape, her salvation. And though no one heard her voice, Maya was building a kingdom of imagination inside her own head. It was a woman in Stamps, a teacher, and family friend named Mrs. Bertha Flowers, who finally pulled Maya back into the world of sound. Mrs. Flowers encouraged her, gently urging her to speak again, introducing her to literature and reciting poetry aloud until one day, Maya whispered back. That whisper turned into sentences, and slowly Maya found her voice again. But it wasn't just any voice. It was a voice that carried power, rhythm, and emotion like thunder waiting to break. Her teenage years were a storm of discovery and struggle. At just 16, Maya became a single mother, giving birth to her only son, Guy Johnson. In an era when being a black single mother was almost impossible, Maya had to fight for survival. She worked as a cook, a waitress, even as the first black female streetcar conductor in San Francisco. Imagine her, young, proud, wearing her uniform, refusing to bow down to the limitations the world tried to impose on her. But Maya was never ordinary. Her talents began to bloom in ways no one could ignore. She had a gift for performance. Her tall, striking presence, her commanding voice, and her fierce determination led her into the world of dance, theater, and singing. She traveled the world as a dancer, learned new languages, lived in Ghana, and became part of the Pan-Africanist movement. Yet beneath the glamour of her performances, Maya carried with her the deep scars of racism, sexism, and personal loss. These experiences weren't just wounds. They were the soil from which her art would grow. In the 1960s, Maya Angelou's path crossed with some of the greatest minds of the civil rights movement. She worked alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, lending her voice, her organizing power, and her art to the fight for justice. She wasn't just a performer anymore. She had become an activist, a warrior for her people. But the world would come to know her most famously not just for her activism, but for her words. In 1969, Maya released her first autobiography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. It was groundbreaking. For the first time, a black woman was boldly telling her story, the raw truth of childhood trauma, racism, resilience, and triumph. The book shook the literary world. It gave voice to millions of women, millions of black people who had long been silenced. The book didn't just make her famous, it made her a symbol. A symbol of courage, a symbol of survival, a symbol of speaking truth even when it shakes the world. By now, Maya Angelou had transformed from a silenced little girl in Arkansas to an international icon. She wrote poetry that touched the soul, lines that made people pause and reflect. She performed on stages across the globe, her deep, powerful voice resonating like a hymn. She advised presidents, received dozens of honorary degrees, and stood as a beacon of what it meant to rise from pain into purpose. But through it all, Maya never forgot where she came from. She never forgot the silent years, the pain, the prejudice, the struggles. Instead, she used them. Every scar became a story. Every injustice became a line of poetry. Every hardship became fuel for her fire. The setup of Maya Angelou's story is not just about her personal journey. It is the story of a people. It is the story of black resilience, of refusing to be silenced, of taking suffering and turning it into song. It's the story of how one woman, against all odds, became the voice of a generation. And yet, this is only the beginning. For Maya's journey is filled with twists, moments of heartbreak, moments of triumph, and revelations that would forever change not only her own life but the lives of millions who found strength in her words. By the time Maya Angelou stepped into adulthood, she was no longer just Marguerite Johnson, the girl from Stamps, Arkansas. She had lived lifetimes before most people even reached their 20s. She had tasted sorrow, shame, single motherhood, and endless struggle. But she had also tasted survival. And survival had given her something the world could never take away: resilience. Her early years as a performer were dazzling but exhausting. Maya threw herself into dance and theater, mastering styles from African rhythms to modern ballet. She toured internationally, performing in cabaret halls and grand theaters. Her striking frame, her sharp intelligence, and her voice, which could glide from sultry to thunderous, captivated audiences across continents. She wasn't just a performer, she was an artist who carried stories within her body. In the 1950s, she traveled across the globe, from Europe to Africa, and it was here that Maya began to feel her identity expand beyond borders. She lived in Ghana for several years, raising her son Guy in a country that, unlike America, celebrated blackness. In Ghana, she met revolutionaries, poets, and thinkers. She became close friends with Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana's first president, and legendary civil rights activist W.E.B. Du Bois. It was in this space of Pan-African pride that Maya's political consciousness exploded. She no longer saw herself as just a dancer or singer. She was part of something bigger, a movement that stretched from Harlem to Accra, from Montgomery to Johannesburg. She wrote articles, spoke at gatherings, and joined communities of African intellectuals who dreamed of liberation and dignity for black people worldwide. But even as she embraced her new role as an activist, Maya's life was never free from turmoil. Raising her son alone in foreign lands was difficult. Money was often scarce. She endured heartbreak, unstable relationships, and moments when the weight of being both mother and pioneer threatened to crush her. Yet every time life pushed her down, Maya rose. She had learned, since childhood, that silence could kill, but words could set you free. When Maya returned to the United States in the 1960s, the civil rights movement was in full swing. Black voices across the nation were demanding justice, freedom, and equality. Maya stepped directly into the heart of this struggle. She worked alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., organizing for his Southern Christian Leadership Conference. She also collaborated with Malcolm X, helping him establish the Organization of Afro-American Unity. Few people in history can say they stood beside both men, two giants with different visions, for black liberation. But Maya did. She was no longer just a performer or writer. She was a soldier in the fight for justice, and yet tragedy seemed to follow her. In 1965, as Maya prepared to launch a new project with Malcolm X, he was assassinated. Just 3 years later, Martin Luther King Jr. was also killed. These losses devastated Maya. For a woman who had already known personal trauma, the deaths of these leaders felt like the crushing of a dream for her people. Once again, silence tried to reclaim her. Once again, grief threatened to lock her voice away, but Maya refused to surrender. Instead, she turned deeper into her writing. It was in her words that she found healing, and it was in her words that she gave healing to others. Then came the book that would change everything. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, 1969. It was raw, it was honest, and it was unlike anything the world had seen before. Maya laid her life bare on the pages, her childhood trauma, her muteness, her teenage motherhood, her struggles with racism and identity. The book didn't just tell a story. It shattered taboos. It gave language to the silenced pain of black women everywhere. Critics were stunned. Readers were moved to tears. Schools debated whether such honesty was too dangerous for young people to read. But Maya didn't write to be safe. She wrote to be true. And her truth resonated. Her memoir became a landmark in literature, making her one of the first black women to publicly and unapologetically share her life story with such openness. And it was only the beginning. Maya went on to write 6 more autobiographies, each one expanding the story of her life, each one capturing the struggles and victories of her people. But Maya Angelou wasn't only about books. She was everywhere, on television, in theaters, on stages where she read her poetry to audiences who sat spellbound. Her voice had a gravity to it, a commanding force that made people lean in. When Maya spoke, the world listened. Her rising fame brought her to the highest stages. She performed at Carnegie Hall. She directed films. She appeared on television shows, breaking barriers in Hollywood as one of the few black women with real power in storytelling. She advised presidents and mentored generations of young artists and activists. Yet for all her accomplishments, Maya remained deeply human. She was flawed, vulnerable, and honest about her struggles with self-doubt, with love, with loneliness. That was what made her extraordinary. She never pretended to be perfect. Instead, she showed the world that strength is not the absence of pain. It is the courage to rise from it. By the 1980s and 1990s, Maya Angelou had become an international icon. She received more than 30 honorary degrees. She was nominated for Tony and Emmy Awards. She published poetry collections that became bestsellers. But perhaps one of her most defining moments came in 1993, when she stood at the inauguration of President Bill Clinton and read her poem, On the Pulse of Morning. Her deep, resonant voice carried across the crowd and through television screens into millions of homes. She spoke of hope, of unity, of a new beginning for America. That day, she wasn't just a poet. She was the conscience of a nation. Maya's rising action was not just about fame. It was about transformation. From a silenced child to a global icon, her journey embodied the resilience of black people, the power of art, and the unbreakable spirit of humanity. Every performance, every book, every speech was a brick laid in the monument of her legacy. She was living proof that words could heal, inspire, and ignite revolutions. And yet, even as the world celebrated her, Maya knew the journey was not complete. For every honor she received, she remembered the struggles of her people, the pain of her past, and the voices still silenced by injustice. The rising action of Maya Angelou's life wasn't just the climb to fame. It was the climb to meaning. It was the slow but steady transformation of her voice into something larger than herself. Maya Angelou was no longer just Maya. She had become a symbol, the voice of a generation. The world had watched Maya Angelou rise from silence into song, from shadows into the spotlight. But every great journey has a moment where everything converges, where triumph, legacy, and destiny collide. For Maya, that moment was not one single event, but a series of climactic peaks where her voice shook the very foundations of society. By the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Maya had already become a force of nature. She was not just a poet, not just a performer, not just a memoirist. She was a living embodiment of survival and wisdom, the kind of figure who made people pause in awe the moment she walked into a room. Her presence was commanding, regal almost, yet warm enough to draw anyone in. But it was in 1993 that the world witnessed her voice at its most powerful. On January 20th, as millions tuned in to the inauguration of President Bill Clinton, Maya Angelou took the stage. The eyes of the nation were upon her. Dressed in her dignified gown, standing tall, she began to read her poem, On the Pulse of Morning. Her words were not just poetry. They were prophecy. She called for renewal, for unity, for courage to face the sins of the past and step into the future together. Her deep, melodic voice carried each syllable like thunder rolling across a quiet valley. The crowd was silent, mesmerized. Through the television, millions of people, black, white, rich, poor, felt her words pierce them. Lift up your eyes upon this day breaking for you. Give birth again to the dream. In that moment, Maya Angelou was more than a poet. She was the conscience of America, a reminder of its failures and a beacon of what it could still become. That performance became legendary. It wasn't simply a poem, it was a reckoning. It was a promise. It was Maya's voice reaching its ultimate power, echoing through history. But Maya's climactic moments didn't belong only to grand stages. They were also woven into the intimacy of her books and the way they touched millions of individual lives. Her series of autobiographies continued to break barriers, especially for black women who saw themselves reflected in her struggles and triumphs. Through her, they understood that their pain was valid, their beauty undeniable, their resilience unshakable. Her words, "Still I rise," became a battle cry. Women whispered it to themselves before job interviews. Students repeated it when facing discrimination. Activists carried it into protests. The poem transcended literature. It became a spiritual anthem for survival. But behind the public persona, Maya carried her private battles too. The weight of expectation, the loneliness of fame, the pain of losing friends and loved ones. When her son Guy suffered a near-fatal car accident in Ghana, Maya stayed by his side, caring for him through his long recovery. When Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated on her birthday, April 4, 1968, she stopped celebrating the day altogether, turning what should have been joy into remembrance and mourning. These private heartbreaks gave her words their raw authenticity. She didn't write from theory, she wrote from scars. The climax of Maya's life wasn't about perfection, it was about truth. The truth that pain can break you, but it can also build you. The truth that silence can suffocate, but voice can liberate. The truth that one woman, one black woman, could rise from the ashes of injustice and trauma and stand tall as a global symbol of resilience. In the 2000s, her influence only deepened. Presidents sought her counsel. Students studied her works. Generations that had never known the segregated South still found themselves moved by her stories. Oprah Winfrey, one of Maya's closest friends, often referred to her as the greatest mentor of my life, calling her a mother, a sister, a guide. Maya Angelou's life reached a climactic beauty in the way she bridged worlds, the world of art and politics, the personal and the universal, the pain of the past and the hope of the future. She had transformed her trauma into triumph, her silence into song, her life into a living testament, and as her voice continued to echo in classrooms, theaters and public stages, one thing became undeniable. Maya Angelou was no longer just one woman. She was a movement. Her climax was not a single applause or a single award. It was the thunderous recognition that her words would never die. Because long after the stages grew quiet, and the lights dimmed, her voice, deep, resounding, unforgettable, would continue to whisper, to roar, to rise. When a person lives a life as vast, as powerful, and as meaningful as Maya Angelou, their story doesn't end with their final breath. It extends outward, rippling through generations, echoing in classrooms, libraries, living rooms, and on stages across the globe. Maya's life was not only a life lived for herself, it was a legacy crafted for everyone who dared to rise, to speak, and to dream. Maya's later years were a graceful extension of the woman she had always been, strong, elegant, wise, and deeply committed to truth. By the time she reached her 70s and 80s, she was no longer just a celebrated writer and poet. She had become something larger. She was a cultural mother, a guiding figure, an elder whose presence alone commanded respect. In interviews, her voice, rich, steady, deliberate, carried the weight of decades of survival and triumph. She never rushed her words. She let each syllable settle like seeds into the hearts of her listeners. She taught, not just through her books, but through her way of being. Her resilience, her laughter, her honesty, her ability to embrace life fully with all its pain and beauty. Maya Angelou's impact was not confined to one community or one nation. She belonged to the world. Her works were translated into dozens of languages, reaching people who had never stepped foot in America, yet who felt the power of her story as if it were their own. She stood as living proof that the human spirit could transcend borders, languages, and even history itself. But what made her legacy so extraordinary was the accessibility of her wisdom. She never spoke above her audience. She spoke directly to them, making even the most complex truths feel intimate, personal, and immediate. When Maya said, "People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel," the world understood. It was a truth so simple, so profound, that it instantly became a guide for living. As her body aged, Maya never slowed down creatively. She continued to write, publish, and perform. She appeared in films, lent her voice to documentaries, and even embraced younger generations by mentoring artists, activists, and writers who sought her wisdom. Oprah Winfrey, who called Maya her mentor and spiritual mother, often credited her for shaping her own voice, career, and vision. To Oprah and to millions of others, Maya was more than a poet. She was a compass. Her honors were countless. Over 30 honorary degrees, dozens of literary awards, nominations for Tony and Emmy Awards, and invitations to speak at some of the most prestigious events in the world. Presidents sought her counsel, universities studied her works, and artists quoted her words in their music, art, and films. And yet, through all the fame, Maya remained grounded. She often spoke about the humility of washing floors as a teenager, of struggling to raise her son alone, of being told she wasn't enough. She wore her past not as shame, but as a crown, a testament to the truth that anyone, no matter how broken, could rise. On May 28, 2014, Maya Angelou passed away at the age of 86. The news shook the world. Leaders, artists, and everyday people mourned her as though they had lost a family member. Because in many ways they had, but Maya's death was not an ending, it was a transformation. Almost instantly her words surged again into the spotlight. Social media flooded with her quotes. Schools revisited her works. Communities gathered to read her poetry aloud. Her voice, preserved in books, recordings, and films, became immortal. The impact of Maya Angelou's life can be measured in several ways. In literature, she redefined what it meant to tell one's story. Before Maya, few Black women dared to write openly about their trauma, their sexuality, their survival. After Maya, the floodgates opened. Writers of color, women, and marginalized voices found courage in her example. She didn't just write books, she opened doors. In activism, her involvement with the civil rights movement placed her in history's most important battles for justice. But even beyond marches and organizations, her activism lived in her words. Her poetry, essays, and speeches carried the weight of centuries of injustice while offering a vision of hope. She reminded the world that the fight for dignity was not just political, it was deeply human. In art and culture, Maya Angelou proved that art is a weapon. Her dance, her theater, her films, her performances, all carried messages of resilience and truth. She showed that storytelling, in any form, had the power to change hearts and minds. In humanity, above all, Maya Angelou gave the world permission to be human. To hurt, to fail, to rise, to love, to hope. She told the silenced that their voices mattered. She told the broken that they could heal. She told the oppressed that their dignity could never be stolen. Her resolution is also our beginning. Because the impact of Maya Angelou is not sealed in the past. It is alive every time a young girl of color dares to dream bigger than her circumstances. It is alive every time someone finds courage in the face of prejudice. It is alive every time a reader, somewhere in the world, picks up her book and realizes, if Maya could survive this, then maybe I can too. Maya's story ends not with silence, but with a symphony of voices she helped to liberate. Today, when we hear her words, "Still, I rise," we don't just think of Maya Angelou. We think of all those who continue to rise in the face of injustice. Her voice became their voice. Her strength became their strength. Her legacy became their inheritance. Maya Angelou's resolution is simple, yet eternal. The world tried to silence her, but she became the loudest voice of her generation. And long after the applause has faded, her spirit continues to whisper to us all, "You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust I'll rise."